Cybersecurity researchers have spent years warning about a handful of Android settings that quietly expose far more of your personal data than most people realize, and 3 of them in particular keep showing up again and again in security audits, leaked data investigations, and stalkerware detection reports. None of these require you to download a sketchy app or click a suspicious link. They're sitting inside your phone's default settings right now, active for most users without them ever realizing it. In the next few minutes, I'm going to break down exactly what these 3 settings are, why security researchers flag them as high risk, real incidents tied to each one, and the exact steps to lock them down on your Android phone today. Let's start with the first one, and this is probably the biggest one on the list. Your app permissions, specifically background data access and usage access permissions that go far beyond what most apps actually need to function. Here's the problem. When you install an app from the Play Store, Android asks you to approve a list of permissions, things like camera, microphone, contacts, storage, and location. Most people scroll through these quickly and tap Allow for everything because they just want to start using the app. But a huge number of apps request permissions that have absolutely nothing to do with their core function. A simple calculator app asking for access to your contacts, a flashlight app asking for your precise location, a photo editing app asking for microphone access. These aren't hypothetical examples. They've shown up repeatedly in independent audits of apps on the Play Store, and in several documented cases, apps with excessive permissions were later found quietly harvesting contact lists, location history, and device identifiers, then selling that data to third-party data brokers completely legally, buried in a privacy policy nobody read. There's also a more specific and more dangerous version of this problem called usage access, or accessibility service permission. This is a special, more powerful permission that lets an app see what's happening on your screen in real time, across other apps, not just its own. Accessibility service was originally built for legitimate purposes, like screen readers for visually impaired users. But because it's so powerful, it has become one of the most common entry points for malicious apps and, more disturbingly, for stalkerware. Apps installed by an abusive partner or family member to secretly monitor someone's phone, including their texts, browsing activity, and location, all in real time, all without any visible icon or notification most of the time. Security researchers at organizations tracking stalkerware, including the Coalition Against Stalkerware, have repeatedly identified accessibility service abuse as one of the primary mechanisms these surveillance apps use to operate undetected. So here's how to check and fix this. Go into your phone's Settings app, then Apps, then tap the gear icon or 3-dot menu for Special App Access, or on some phones it's directly under Settings, then Security and Privacy, then Special Permissions. Look specifically for 2 lists, accessibility and usage access. Go through both of these lists carefully. You are looking for any app you don't recognize, don't remember installing, or that has no obvious reason to need this level of access. If you see anything unfamiliar, tap it and revoke the permission immediately, then consider uninstalling the app entirely if you can't explain why it's there. While you're in the main app settings menu, it's also worth doing a broader sweep of app permissions generally. Tap into Permission Manager, which will show you every permission category, camera, microphone, location, contacts, and so on, and let you see every single app that has access to each one. Go category by category and ask yourself honestly whether each app actually needs that access. A note-taking app doesn't need your microphone unless it has a voice memo feature you actually use. A shopping app doesn't need your contacts. Revoke anything that doesn't have a clear, obvious reason to be there. This single sweep, which takes maybe 5 minutes, closes off one of the most common and most exploited privacy gaps on Android devices. Now let's move to the second setting, which is one people almost never think about: clipboard access. Every time you copy something on your phone, a password, a 2-factor authentication code, a private message, an address, it gets temporarily stored in your device's clipboard. What most people don't realize is that, depending on your Android version and settings, apps running in the background can silently read the contents of your clipboard without ever asking for explicit permission, and without you knowing it happened. This became such a widely recognized problem that Apple actually added a notification banner to iOS specifically alerting users whenever an app reads clipboard content. And the backlash from that transparency feature was significant because it revealed just how many popular mainstream apps, including major social media platforms, were reading users' clipboards constantly in the background, far more often than users ever expected, often for no clear functional reason. Android has been catching up on this front, and more recent versions of Android, specifically Android 12 and later, added similar clipboard access notifications and also automatically clear clipboard history after a short period to reduce this exposure. But here's the catch. A large number of people are still running older Android versions, either because their phone hasn't been updated or because their device is no longer receiving security updates at all, which is a huge issue on its own that we'll come back to in a moment. Hi, If you're on an older Android version without these protections, any app with background permissions could theoretically grab something you copied, including a password you copied from a password manager, a banking one-time code, or a private conversation, all without your knowledge. To check and reduce your exposure here, first go into Settings, then About Phone, and check your Android version. If you're running Android 12 or newer, you already have some baked-in clipboard access notifications working in the background, and you should occasionally see a small toast notification pop up saying something like "pasted from clipboard" when an app reads it, which is worth paying attention to rather than dismissing automatically. If you're on an older version, the most effective fix is simply changing your habits. Avoid copying highly sensitive information like passwords and two-factor codes when possible, and instead use a password manager app that autofills credentials directly without you ever needing to copy and paste them into the clipboard at all. Most major password managers, including free ones, support this autofill functionality specifically to avoid this exact clipboard exposure risk. Now let's get to the third setting, and this one ties directly into what I just mentioned. Outdated software and delayed security patches, specifically the setting, or rather the lack of a setting, controlling automatic security updates. This might sound less exciting than a specific toggle you can flip, but security researchers consistently rank this as one of the single biggest real-world risk factors for Android users, arguably bigger than any individual privacy setting. Here's why. Google issues monthly security patches for Android that fix newly discovered vulnerabilities, some of which are serious enough to allow remote attackers to access a device's data, camera, or microphone without ever needing physical access to the phone. But unlike Apple, which controls both the hardware and software for iPhones and pushes updates directly to all supported devices simultaneously, Android updates have to pass through phone manufacturers first, companies like Samsung, Motorola, and others, who then decide when or if to push those patches to their specific phone models. This creates enormous delays. Some budget and mid-range Android phones stop receiving security patches entirely within just 1 to 2 years of release, even though people often keep using those same phones for 3, 4, or 5 years afterward. This matters enormously because when Google publicly discloses a security vulnerability and issues a patch, that disclosure itself becomes a roadmap for attackers, targeting devices that haven't been patched yet. Researchers have documented real-world exploitation of known patched vulnerabilities, specifically targeting older or unsupported Android devices, precisely because attackers know a large percentage of users are still running phones that never received the fix. Here's what to actually do about this. First, go into Settings, then System, then look for System Update or Security Update, depending on your manufacturer's layout. Check when your last security patch was installed. If it's been more than 2 or 3 months, manually check for an update right there, since sometimes updates are available, but haven't auto-downloaded yet. Second, and this is the more important long-term point, if you're in the market for a new phone or advising someone else who is, prioritize devices with a longer guaranteed update commitment. Google's own Pixel phones, along with Samsung's flagship Galaxy S series, now commit to several years of guaranteed security updates, whereas cheaper budget phones frequently offer little to no long-term update commitment at all. This is genuinely one of the most overlooked factors people consider when buying a phone, focusing entirely on camera specs and battery life while ignoring how long that phone will actually stay protected against newly discovered vulnerabilities. Now, I want to step back for a second and talk about why all 3 of these settings tend to fly under the radar, because there's a common thread connecting them. In every single case, the risky configuration is the default configuration, and fixing it requires the user to actively go find the setting and change it themselves. Nobody gets a push notification saying, hey, 16 of your apps have accessibility permissions they probably don't need, or your phone hasn't gotten a security patch in 8 months. These aren't things that interrupt your day or demand attention, so they quietly sit there, unaddressed for years on millions of devices. This is genuinely one of the biggest gaps in how consumer technology handles security and privacy generally. The protective options usually exist somewhere in the settings menu, buried a few taps deep, worded in technical language that doesn't clearly communicate the actual risk to an average user. The convenient path and the risky path are almost always the same path, and the safer path requires you to go looking for it. So let's do a quick recap of everything covered, because I want this to actually translate into you doing something after watching, not just nodding along and moving on to the next video. Number 1, go into Settings, then Apps, then Permission Manager, and review every permission category, paying especially close attention to accessibility and usage access under Special App Access. Revoke anything unfamiliar or unnecessary. Number 2, be mindful of what you copy to your clipboard, particularly passwords and two-factor codes. And if you're on an older Android version without clipboard protections, switch to a password manager with autofill to avoid copying sensitive data at all. Number 3, check your security patch date under Settings, System, Security Update. Manually check for updates if it's been a while, and factor long-term update support into your next phone purchase. Each of these takes just a few minutes to check, but together they close some of the most consistently exploited gaps that show up again and again in security research on Android devices. This isn't about becoming paranoid or assuming every app on your phone is spying on you. It's simply about understanding that a small handful of default settings quietly expose more than most people ever intend, and that closing those gaps takes far less effort than most people assume. If this was helpful, go check these 3 settings on your own phone right now while it's fresh in your mind, because the whole point of a video like this is useless if you close the tab and forget about it in 5 minutes. And if you want the next one to cover a specific phone brand or a different platform entirely, let me know in the comments, because there's a lot more of this hiding in plain sight across nearly every device people use every single day.